What does a high-performing team look like? It's a team that has drive, is focused on the goals, is working together, is elevating themselves and each other, and they're winning. But what's really key in this as you're developing your team is making sure that you're making the priority. You have very clear goals for each individual, you have very clear goals for your team, and that you don't let your priorities get out of hand.
Welcome to the Backcountry Marketing Podcast. Today, I'm sitting down with Sarah Harper Burke. She is the founder of Clashes with Khakis, a consulting and advising marketing strategy firm for the outdoor industry. Sarah, how are you?
Hi, nice to see you, Cole.
Yeah, it's good to have you on the show. How's your day going?
Yeah, it's a great day here in Charleston.
Well, I'm excited to have you on. We're going to be discussing a fun conversation that we frequently talk about on this show, but I don't feel like we've ever really talked about enough because it's important. We're going to be talking about leadership and the ability to create a plan to help build your team. In the past, we've talked about leadership and we've talked about ideals and principles, but in this conversation, Sarah, we're going to really dive deep into how to do the how. And I appreciated your perspective when we connected earlier about this and wanted to bring you on the show to share this with everyone.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. I'm excited to have this talk today.
Well, before we dive in, can you share with us a little bit about your background and where did the name Clashes with Khakis come from?
Clashes with Khakis is my fictional punk rock band. It's always been a small, weird topic of conversation at a dinner party. And I figured you have to use it sometime because I won't be forming a punk rock band in the near future, but you never know.
And what do you guys do today?
Right now, working with small brands, small businesses on marketing and sales strategies overall, and kind of moving that into more fractional marketing leadership roles.
Yeah, and can you share some of the roles you've shared previously in-house at brands?
Yeah. So I've had a full career, that spanned outdoor bike, ski, and now fishing. I started my career in the whitewater paddle sports space. I worked for some great paddle outfitters like Zor Outdoor and Nantahala Outdoor Center. I finished my career in that space, opening the U.S. National Whitewater Center in Charlotte, North Carolina. From there, I was able to go to work in the outdoor space for Osprey Packs on the western slope of Colorado, which was a wonderful experience. And in that time, found my passion for business and marketing, got my MBA. While living on the western slope, wanted to see what other worlds we could kind of navigate with that experience. So I found myself at Vail Resorts in the corporate office for the retail team. Had a great experience really leaning into leadership development and in that corporate space specifically. But as an opportunity to move back to the Southeast, we found an opportunity to work for Shimano in the fishing division, running all of the marketing for North America.
Wow. Was there an industry in particular that you enjoyed the most?
They've all been great. My thread that kind of puts all of those things together is really helping people be outside and getting people excited to be outside. And so from outdoor and ski and fish, there are a lot of enthusiasts and new people to each sport that I get a lot of joy out of seeing people experience all of those activities. So I can't say that I can pick one over the other.
And why is this a topic you're interested in? How did you fall into this?
Leadership's always been a topic that I've really enjoyed. I love leadership business books. I love, having those discussions. But at the end of the day, we know that our jobs and our worlds, it's so many hours of how we experience this life. And in navigating leadership as a topic, it's a way to elevate how we can all show up, right? I've worked for good leaders. I've worked for some not so great leaders. I've been a good leader for some people, and even very well-intentioned, I've, failed in 4 different people. And it's an area that if we all continue to focus on in our worlds, in these industries, it's just going to continue to elevate the bar, make them better places to work, make them stronger brands overall. So I find a lot of value in the topic of leadership development.
And what were you doing at Vail around this idea?
Yeah. So Vail Resorts, from corporate headquarters to folks working on the ground at the resorts, they have a wonderful leadership development program where they really lean into what their core values are, how people can work within developing those core values, and just the whole process. They've really created a good formula around enabling people to be successful in who they are from where they sit to be a leader.
And what was your role within all that? How did you interact with that program?
Well, I took advantage of all of the courses as much as possible, but I had a really big, diverse team that was out in the field, and so really leaned into making sure that I was learning about how to be a leader for a lot of different types of people and a lot of different personalities. So in the retail division, at all of the different resorts, when you see different retail spaces like a Burton store or a Patagonia store, Vail owns and operates those locations. And to have people on the ground, making sure that the marketing is really helping at that part of the funnel for the customer experience. It brought in a lot of different types of personalities and people to work with. And so the more leadership development courses that I took, be it women in leadership or how to, be a leader within a changing environment, was really beneficial in supporting me, in my own skills of how I was able to approach it.
So something that you mentioned there that I find interesting is I think it's easy for us to be leaders for people who are like us. But when there's someone on your team who maybe isn't like you, that's when I think a true leader really is put to the test. Would you say that's true? Have you observed that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Insights is a big program that's used, and it was a program I got to know through Vail. And they kind of, have the buckets of the 4 different type of personalities. I always said it's like the love languages for corporate speak. But to figure out essentially what your love language is, how you show up at work, and, be it in a, yellow gregarious way or in a very like curt and blunt and be bold, be gone type red behavior, or an empathetic type leader, or and people who just want details. You're absolutely right that it's, for me, being a little more of an outgoing personality who I love interacting with people and diving into conversation and getting to know you behind, just the regular work day. I know that I really connect with those same type of personalities and find such shared space in that. But then for other types of leaders, that I am not their cup of tea. And so how do I ensure that I'm still raising my own skill set to communicate more effectively, to be more organized, to show up as the leader that they need me to be? And that's a great opportunity for anybody to lead into.
Can you back up and what were those 4 personality types?
Yeah.
Can you expand on those?
Sure. So Insights, they do 4 separate colors. It's red, which is kind of, your curt and strong, bold a type leader. They have yellow, which is outgoing, friendly, gregarious. Green, which is empathetic and connecting. And then blue, which is really based on details and wanting to know all of the pieces before they feel comfortable in the space. And so you learn, we all have dominant traits in those colors, but we have all of those traits in how we show up. And so it's better understanding yourself, how you work, but then to recognize, like, what if I lead with yellow, but this person over here leads with red? How do I make sure that I'm approaching them appropriately and I'm giving them what they need to go be successful, but I'm also hearing from them in how they communicate as well.
Would you say that's one of the most important places to start, is understanding where you fall in that color spectrum?
To have a personal sense, absolutely. Having the emotional intelligence to be self-reflective is a big part to anybody, no matter where you are. But in a leadership journey, that's a really great place to start.
So let's talk about who kind of this episode is for.
Yeah.
I think everyone can learn something from this, but if folks are listening, maybe describe some situations or some circumstances where someone might be, where the next steps that you're going to talk about here are super beneficial.
Yeah. So we're going to be discussing kind of a framework of how I approach building high-performing teams, right? And I think that the audience for that really is two separate camps. One, you're going to have people who are going to be new to management, new to leadership, who are looking for that framework. Like if you're already reading great business books and you're talking about, Leaders Eat Last or Dare to Lead or great things like that, but you don't really know how to put it to work, right? They're creating action. So I think that there's a bucket of kind of new managers who are in their first roles of having people report to them and creating that structure. And then I also think that the other camp is, to talk to people in more senior roles where, they might already have their own kind of formula in how they approach building their teams. And hopefully this is just part of that conversation and dialogue to continue to add to that toolkit.
Something you mentioned was in our earlier call was talking about the how of the how. And you mentioned there's all these great books out there. You mentioned a few: Leaders Eat Last, Dare to Lead, hundreds of others.
Yep.
They talk a lot about ideals. They talk a lot about, the 50,000 foot level of how to be a good leader. Do they get to the next level? Do they get to like the 30,000 foot level where you're actually in the process of building your team and you want to learn, how do I build my team? And I think that's kind of where this conversation fits into that hierarchy of ideals, right?
Yeah. So I think that a lot of these business books and conversations going on are they're theoretical, they're great tools. But where do you use those tools in the system of building your team? Because it can't be, you're just going to read extreme ownership and you're like, okay, everybody, you're accountable to everything and therefore we're good, right? We need to have more of a basis of how are you going to bring those concepts into your daily reality? How are you going to make them part of your team, normalize them as a function of who your team is? But more so, we're in a business. So how do you use those concepts to make sure that you have high-performing output when it comes to sales and marketing initiatives and strategies?
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to dive in. One more question before we do. How do you define leadership? What is leadership to you?
I think leadership to me is this opportunity to utilize your foundation of emotional intelligence and show up every day, challenging yourself to be better and challenging the people around you to continue to elevate who they are as well. And I think that really supports that concept of everyone is a leader. It doesn't matter what seat or title that you hold, that we're all here to lean into being better.
I love that. So you've got 6 steps.
Yeah.
Let's start with step number 1 and kind of preface what these steps, as we walk through them, what will they do? What will the outcome be?
Sure. So I've just given thought, and it's not as though, I have a full TED talk on these are the 6 steps to success, but I've been giving a lot of thought to what are the things that I've been doing in my last few roles that have been meaningful, and how do I want to continue to grow on them? And so, again, it's in not putting that theoretical, business books at the beginning, but seeing where they fit. So for me, in order to create a high-performing team, you first and foremost need to know the business needs and the business objectives, right? We're not doing this just to be better people. We can do that on our own time. We're trying to understand what do we need to be doing for our brands, for our businesses in order to grow. And that really does start with the business objectives. Do you need to grow in a certain segment of your business? Do you need to identify what are the growth opportunities? What are the challenges? What's the overall direction of the company? So that you understand what's the company needs and therefore what's the leadership involved to get your team and your activities from here to where you're supposed to go. So that's always going to be step 1, is to know the business of your business. And better understand how sales marketing can fit into that to overall be successful.
That sounds simple, makes a lot of sense, but I would imagine if you actually stop and think about it, you might learn something if you frame this into a step to actually pause and think about.
Yeah. I also think that some people stop there, right? Business needs this, therefore we'll go do this. And I think the pitfall in stopping there when you're leading a team is, when you fumble on over yourself, when you don't prioritize, when you're not speaking the same language. And so I think, yes, this is the baseline, but some leaders just sometimes stop there, and there's still plenty of room to grow to make sure that you're going to, again, elevate into more high performing. So from there, I think it's this opportunity to then look at who is on your team, right? Look at what their strengths, what their weaknesses are. This is where those type of activities like the insights can really be put into play. Other programs, and there's plenty of them, but like Strengths Finders, great opportunity to better understand who you're working with. We're all people. We all have strengths. We all have flaws. And so it's what can you do then to better understanding what the people on your team need for them to be successful, right? And that's know what motivates them, know how they communicate, know, what they're afraid of. I think, the reality is a lot of us work from being, having fear. Fear is a big part of how a lot of people show up in their everyday and how they communicate even. So it's to better understand people's, strengths and insecurities. And so that's when you get to know your team.
And to do so, do you recommend that leaders run their entire team through a strength finding class, or I'm blanking on the name of the personality test, the 10 personality tests you could take.
Yeah.
Do you recommend people do that? Or do you feel like you can figure this out just by spending day-to-day time with each other, working alongside someone?
I think you can go either way, honestly. I can sit in both camps for it. I think if there is a corporate structure to support doing a formalized program, that's great. Because that means that there is more commitment to follow through to showing the value of everyone. With a pitfall into doing, those personality tests is that, again, in that we get along better with people that we more resemble, is that you're going to say, okay, well, I'm a very driven person and I'm really bold and I just want other bold people along with me. And that's a pitfall as well, because, if you're not using some of these tools correctly, there can be a lot of downfall to it of not valuing everyone's voice. And it's almost a team of rivals type opportunity, is that you need a little bit of everybody on your team.
You mentioned a few characteristics: motivation, communication, fear, and then I added one, technical skills.
Yeah.
Are there any other things that you're trying to identify in step number 2 outside of those 4 when trying to understand your team?
Yeah. I think I'd actually substitute fear for just insecurity.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's the only kind of nuance. I don't see really any other way. And this is, I know I could be wrong, but we're missing things. But it's like, again, those are the pieces that you can create formulas for people to go be successful, right? Is if you understand those things, what's driving them, what brings joy to their lives, what are they afraid of, these are big things. These aren't, you're not going to get to know that in an hour. But, it takes some time, and there are tools, like those strengths finders and insights that can help in that. But it's also just, recognizing the differences in people.
How helpful is it to have a conversation about this? So let's say you put your team through a practice or through a course, and then you actually sit down with them and reflect over, these 4 different characteristics and have a conversation about that. Is that something that you've practiced?
Yes, absolutely. Because again, it's not just for you to build out that team for you and them. It's for a group of people to also have collaboration and connection with each other. Right. And so it's having that open dialogue always, so that people will really understand each other a little bit better. And so, and also to understand themselves. I think that was the nicest part about insights, since there's a whole lot of self-reflection in that. And you can always identify, like, what do I agree with? What do I disagree with? Why? What's my rub? And, does a test really see me? No, of course not. But there's still some really great ways that you can use this self-reflection to be a better teammate overall.
Yeah. Which kind of leads us to point number 3. What is the next step?
So, we now know our business needs. We now know kind of who's on the team, your bench strength. But then it's using that common language, right? It's using those theories, those concepts that you're getting from business books, that you're getting from TED Talks, and, out there seeking what does leadership mean. It's bringing those ideas together so that you have a common language, that you can speak the same concepts together. And, so examples of that would be like with Brene Brown. She talks about rumble with class, or the energy bus. They talk about energy vampires, or extreme ownership, check your ego, right? And so I find that then's the time to make sure that, we're watching the same TED Talks, we're having conversations around them, we're reading some of the same books, so that we can have some connection in our dialogue, that we're all on the same page, right? So energy vampires from the energy bus, right? It's a great way to say, hey man, like, you're down every day, and not having a stoke factor, it's kind of bringing us all, you're being an energy vampire. It seems like kind of insider lingo when you have a lot of those connections, but it's creating those connections so that you're having an even playing field. And so common language is a really big piece, that if I am talking back to vulnerability, that we know what I'm talking about, and that everybody's a little more educated into what vulnerability can mean in the workplace. And so having that common language is then when you kind of bring in those philosophies.
So common language could be misinterpreted as having cliches or cliques or the in crowd and the out crowd. But how do you manage that? Because I guess in our industry, there's a lot of nuance to sport, and there's a lot of particular nomenclature within sport. And when companies are working inside these worlds, to assume that people just understand how these worlds operate. How do you balance that, though, with some of these other ideas that you're talking about? How do you make people feel welcome if they don't understand the world that they're entering, whether it's from a technical nomenclature standpoint of something like a bike, or from a more soft skill perspective of this is how our team communicates?
Yeah. So I think your sports analogy is really perfect, right? You can walk into some corporate offices and it's all sports analogy, and it's all, pushing the next 5 yards, or group sports that not everyone is going to get, right? Unless you're a fan. But the key to normalizing those pieces is to make sure you know what the reference is, and that everyone knows what the reference is. And that's why I really have always appreciated using kind of business leadership books, is that you can say, all right, here's our stack of 4 books. If you're joining this team, you need to, this stack of 4 books is going to be a really great place to enter into this group and in this team with common ground.
Will you go so far as to make a dictionary of here's all
list?
the
You bet.
Yeah.
You
Okay.
bet. But that also, it leads into kind of that next step, which I just referenced as shared agreements. So shared agreements is creating that team norms. It's to say, all right, we know where we're going. We know who we are. We have some common verbiage. But now we need to agree around what type of behavior we're going to bring to this team. And this can be a really formalized process. It kind of needs to be, because there's a lot of brainstorming and a lot of team building in this structure. But it's to create a team norms document that says, this is how we agree. These are our pillars, our foundational functions of who we are as a team. And this is who we want to be. And if we see each other acting outside of these agreed kind of functions of the team that we want to be, we have permission to kind of call each other out and bring each other back into those norms. So it's having a shared agreement of, this is the team we are. We're going to put it out there. We're going to print it. We're going to have it at our desks so that we can be reflective on, look, if our pillar of clear communication, if that's what your team decides to have is a pillar of who you are, and we're having side conversations with different departments that are undermining our team's communication, we need to say, hey, we agreed to this. So let's bring it back to that shared agreement, what our team norms are, so that, bad behavior can't be tolerated amongst us. It doesn't have to come from who is leading this team. It comes from the team itself. That's elevating how your team can work together. And again, that common language really helps shape, taking those philosophies and then bringing it into a real space of shaping who your team wants to be.
And in doing so, I would imagine gives everyone ownership, and that helps the team fulfill the objective.
Very much so. And even more so, it creates a space where you can say, put your flag in the sand to say, this is who we are. And again, it helps when you bring in anyone else, as you're expanding your team or bringing in new team members, you can say, this is who we've agreed to be. And it's a living document. It's a way to say, we agreed that we were never going to say an unkind word, but hey, man, we had this moment where there are some unkind words. Is this what we really believe in? Can we take it to the table? Can we go toe to toe of is this still a pillar? If yes, great, let's go back to our foundation. If no, right, and we want to rumble kind of a little harsher, okay, let's be okay with that too.
So clear communication seems like an expected pillar of a team, hopefully.
Hopefully.
What are some pillars that you have seen developed or you've developed that maybe aren't so common, or something you wouldn't expect to see in something like this that's very specific to a team that you were on?
I always love seeing when random acts of kindness show up as a pillar. And I think that that's a really neat space to say, we want to be the team who is always kind of going above and beyond, who is sharing the goodness and kindness that we have to give. And I'm always surprised when that shows up, and I love it when it does, because I think it's a really foundational space of who you want to be.
What about the greater company? And I guess this is a question for this specific step, but also for all of these steps. How in line do these need to be with the greater company's core pillars?
Yeah. Well, and that's why we started with step one, is to know, what does the company want? Where is the company going? So that's always infused into, who we need to be in order to, show up for those key objectives. So I work for organizations that they have their core values, and it's, part of the culture in the daily space. And I've worked for organizations that, leadership development is not a core tenet of what they're looking for from their teams. They just want you to show up and get the job done and, keep going. And even within that, it's where we started in this conversation of the why. I want to make sure in my career and the teams that I'm building, the teams that I'm on, that we're empowering everyone to be a leader in the seats that they're in. But also that trying to elevate the space so that we're having a better experience in this life and in these jobs and in this industry overall, right? We're here with a purpose. We're here to get outside. We're here to enable others to get outside, being passionate about activities. And so it needs to have an elevated space that, there's a lot of worse things we can be doing with our time.
So you got me thinking about, this step number 4, make a shared agreement, identify what are the key pillars. And you mentioned communication, and I can see a situation where, let's say we're on a team together and I communicate something to you, and I think I've done a good job of communicating something clearly, but you receive my communication and you say, yeah, Cole, I don't understand this. I need more communication. And I could see a world where you have key pillars, but people interpret those differently.
Yep.
In my opinion, I'm communicating clearly, but you don't feel like I'm communicating clearly. But I guess circling back to step number 3, I'm realizing how these connect. Ideally, maybe there's a book or maybe there's common language about what does clear communication actually mean.
Very
And
much so.
therefore, when we agree to this, we understand what that means.
Exactly. So it is the why we have the common language ahead of it, right? Is so that we have already discussed how other people have put forth some of these ideas, and that we have created agreement on what we think that means for us. But it's also has that foundation of knowing who each other are, that knowing the key strengths that, Cole, you might have thought that, you were really clear and succinct and everybody got it. And there might be somebody on this team saying, hey, I really, I didn't feel good about how that was there. And so I didn't really hear it. And I'm not really on the same page, therefore. And so it's knowing that there's kind of the stepping stones to getting to this point, right? If we just met and we created our own team norms, all right, Cole, this is how we're going to behave, right? You might be bought in, we might be speaking the same language. I don't know, but that's kind of why I wanted to show the progression of building these teams, so that we really do have a progression of team building and a progression of higher levels of performance, because that's what we're getting to overall, right? It's not that we're all feeling better about it. It's that we can actually do more and better work, that we are scaling our ability because we're working together more effectively and efficiently.
Well, it's team building. It's not team built.
Yeah.
It's an active process.
Yeah.
So let's move on. Step 5.
Step 5. So step 5 is where you talk about your goals. Talk about your goals as a team. And this is where kind of the culmination of all the step 1, what are the business objectives? And, but it's to really focus on the work where you need to see improvement. I put this step there because there's always going to be more good ideas than there is capacity to execute, right? And because of that, you need to set really clear goals and really clear priorities. This is where your strategy and tactics and, all of your overall kind of leadership ability has gone to. But what's really key in this, as you're developing your team, is making sure that you're making the priority, that you have very clear goals for each individual. You have very clear goals for your team. You can continue to reiterate and point to these goals, and that you don't let your priorities get out of hand. Now, especially in marketing, there's always going to be all the things. There's always going to be all the priorities. And there's always going to be, yes, and we do the day-to-day. And yes, we do an additional campaign. And yes, there's always going to be more and more. And if you allow all of it to be the priority, you will get spread too thin. Yes, and we do all the things. But if we can focus our goals on those key functions, then we can really create that structure to be successful, right? Like, yes, we'll do the 14 other things, and that is just kind of the part of the function of the role. But if we can keep goals as an elevated, way to say what success looks like then you're going to have a lot more success overall.
You got me thinking about this quote I read once from Bill Gates, and when asked, what attribute would you like more of, or what would you like to be better at? His answer was focus. I think that fits so well into what you're describing here. There's only so much you can do. There's a world of things that you could be doing and things that you probably would rather be doing because it looks more fun or the grass is always greener. But how do you keep the goal the goal? That's essentially what this step 5 is.
Yeah. It's a Brene Brown quote that says, if you have 15 priorities, you actually don't have priorities. And so it's you have to have a lot of discipline to structure. And even when there's a lot of noise, right, from outside of your team of still have to do this and this and this, it's when you're building your own team, it's to ensure, guys, this is our focus, this is our priority, this is what success looks like. And you do that specifically so that you lead into that final goal of you can keep score. You can say, hey, we were successful here, and we can now show how we got there. Or, hey, we missed the mark here, and we can reflect on, okay, what could we have like done better to really hit that goal? Because if you don't create that goal and if you don't keep score, that's when you're just going to create a big team of high achievers that are going to get burned out. Right? I mean, if you're with a team you've now built that you've said, we're going to be this high performing, they really want to be high performing. And if you don't give that team then clear expectations of what success looked like and then show them that they've been successful, you won't have that team for very long.
Yeah. And then unfortunately, all of this work is there's hardly any results to show for it.
Yeah. I mean, there's always going to be results, but they're not going to be clear, and they're not going to be replicable, and they're definitely not going to be scalable. And, that's what we want to be doing, for our brands, for our businesses, is continue to build upon what we've been doing, and, continue to be successful, but still innovate, still find new ways to do things. And you're not going to always do that with more money and more headcount. That's very rare. You're going to do it in ensuring that you've created a really good foundation of how your team works, and you've created really good systems to support their success.
Out of all these steps, where would you say folks get hung up the most? Is there a step where we fall off the tracks often?
Yeah, I think we get to common language and, we kind of stop there. And again, like saying that I've seen leaders who will get to the business objectives and kind of stop there, right? You could stop at any one of these points, right? You could understand people and how they communicate and stop there. But I think the biggest pitfall is if you get to a piece of common language, and you're reading all the books and you say, leaders eat last is the best thing. And we're all going to ask why and kind of format that and then end there. Well, then you're just going to be kind of circulating in philosophy, and you're not really going to build a team that is as high functioning as you need it to be, because you're just going to kind of eddy out into ideals, and you're not going to really rumble with the how, and that's a shortfall.
Why do people stop there? It seems like once you're there, you might as well just keep going.
It's hard work. It's really hard work to get everyone on the same page. It's extra work. It's extra work to think about leadership development. It's extra work to also be reading, also be listening to TED Talks, working on emotional intelligence, working on yourself. It's a lot of extra work. And so you feel accomplished at that point to say, hey guys, we all read, Covey's new book. Like, it was great. But if we stopped there, we still have work ahead of us to then function as a team in a very real space.
It almost seems like, I guess it is, the first 3 steps help you build the foundation, and then the next 3 steps, those are the things that actually allow you to go out into the world and execute.
I think so. But I think having a really strong foundation is what's going to help you over the long run. And again, it's not that I'm creating this formula of step 1, step 2, step 3. I'm just in my reflection of what has been successful, where I've had my own good intentions and haven't showed up for teams or individuals. I really believe it's, all right, have these great ideals, have these great principles and philosophies and a foundation of how you want to work together, but then what do you do with it? And I think it's in that shared agreement, goals, and keeping score. That's what you do with it. That's the action items to then continue to build out how your team can work together and perform at a higher level. And
what about pitfalls? Where do people maybe get hung up? I guess you're kind of already talking about this, but what are some other areas where people might get hung up?
Yeah. I think another area is in that foundation of understanding each other. I think we hit on it earlier of only getting on with other people who are like us. And that's always a really big pitfall. I continue to see teams that it's a whole group of the same person. And, that's a pitfall because you're not always seeing different ways and approaches to doing work, right? It's a great diversity and inclusion topic on its own. But when everybody kind of speaks alike and looks alike and really thinks what success is one thing, it really can limit what success can be. So that's a big pitfall.
How do you recommend a leader, one, recognize maybe recognize that, but then two, embrace someone who is of a different color, or the red, yellow, green, or blue color?
Sure. Well, it's to know kind of where your own opportunities for growth are, right? I know for myself, my opportunity for growth, I speak in very loose terms at times when it comes to like exact amounts and exact function. And for a person who works in that blue space of like, I want to know the details before I feel comfortable about the whole thing. So if I'm saying, hey, it's around like 50 mil or, loose numbers, that is a disservice to someone on my team who works and thinks differently. And so I need to recognize in myself, like, one, I need to continue to elevate how I show up, right? I might be comfortable and I'm in working in loose numbers and loose terminology, but I need to elevate and mature in how I approach numbers and my own outward communication and public speaking. But also I need to say the value of having someone who is so deep into details and so deep of being methodical and a numbers person. It is such a value on my team. Gosh, it would be a disservice to not support someone like that in a really meaningful and purposeful way, so that even for working for me, which might not be their biggest cup of tea, they're still having a really positive experience and they feel supported for them to be successful.
You mentioned the paint done example as a pitfall in our earlier call. Can you share what that is?
Sure. So that comes back to a common language for a team that we read a Brene Brown book, and I want to say it was The Dare to Lead, or maybe it was a different one. She had an example of called paint done. And the example from the book, as I recall, was she had expectations of what her team was doing. They come back to her with the results. It wasn't what she thought it would be. So she got frustrated. They got frustrated. And because she hadn't clearly communicated what done really looked like. And so by that not painting done was the example that we took as a group. And we really talked through that the importance of leadership painting done so that people could go be successful. We found as a team some pitfalls in that philosophy because, I found initially people would kind of use it as a crutch to say, hey, I didn't complete it to, this level that you were looking for because you didn't paint done. And it happened enough, like I started kind of pointing it out. We talked about the book. And then it started to happen to more mid-level managers as well, where they started noticing like, oh, hey, instead of actually elevating, how they were showing up, they were kind of pointing the finger back to me of that I didn't do the work to communicate more clearly. And so that was a pitfall, but a really interesting learning of some great theories and philosophies come from these conversations. And if we do work to put them to work, they're not always going to be perfect. And I think that was one really great example. So maybe not a pitfall, but a really great way that we talked about paint done a lot in that year. And I think it was really helpful in bringing us together of like, okay, what does accountability then mean?
Yeah, that's a complicated situation and one that you only get through by communication and talking with your team.
Yeah. But I'm here for it because I thought that was a really great example of like, hey, we're giving try and we're using shared language and we use that shared language in our shared agreements. And that's why having it being kind of a living document is really important to say, well, we agreed to that, but now I'm finding it's not really working for us. So what does that mean? All right. We also had extreme ownership, as another reference point. And so when we talked about accountability from extreme ownership, there was a really great kind of, again, a reference point of our shared language to use and keep the conversation going.
That is funny you say that, because that was my first thought. Was it seems like an extreme ownership perspective would help work, like the team could work through paint done and accountability together, and they work hand in hand.
Yeah. But the pitfall really would be if you only had that one reference book, right? And you just kind of stuck it there.
Sure.
And instead try to explore a lot of different topics, a lot of different perspectives, and then continue to challenge how can it work for you.
So that's it. Sounds easy.
I think overall, that last part though of keeping score, of noticing like how you can see progress in real time. I had it written down. When a team sees they're having direct impact on the goal, they know they're winning. And I think that's kind of the overall, like, what does a high performing team look like? It's a team that has drive, is focused on the goals, is working together, is elevating themselves and each other, and they're winning. And that's just a big part of, where I think we can all be having a conversation about leadership and leadership development, to the why. And I think that why is building team.
Yeah. Well, Sarah, I appreciate you taking the time to share this. I love the how to do the how. I think this is a fun kind of gritty stage where you get to get your hands dirty and you get to practice some tough ideas. If folks who are listening are interested, I'd highly recommend go back and listen to episodes 126 and 127. Those were 2 episodes we did with Ryan and David from the James brand and Mammut, respectively. We talked about leadership there, but we talked about it in a much different capacity than we have today. So, Sarah, there's a lot of nuance to this. There's a lot to be dissected and kind of worked through. If you had to leave our guests with one idea or one sending off note, what would you want to leave them with about all of this?
At the end of the day, the people that you work with and work around, the teams that you lead and the teams that you're on, they're not going to remember you for the words that you said or for the ideas that you brought to the table. They're going to remember you for how they made you feel. And at the end of these steps and the end of leadership development, it's to ensure that you are making a mark in people's lives, in your own life, to make people feel successful in who they are, and to elevate the space so that our brands and the businesses that we work with can be equally as successful.
I love that. Something new that we're doing, Sarah. What questions are you asking yourself, either about this topic or unrelated? What things are bouncing around in your head these days?
When I'm thinking about some of that common language piece, I only know what I know. And that's, as an individual, it has its own limitations. And so I'm always curious of what other ideas are out there, what other formulas, can I be looking to, what other kind of shared common language can I be creating for my teams that are going to be memorable. I find that, now I'm definitely kind of recycling some of the ideas because they have some amazing principles. And so my questions, though, are what am I missing? And how can I continue to be broadening my foundational language?
Well, if folks who are listening have ideas and they want to connect with you and talk about some of these ideas, where can they go to find you?
Yeah. So you can find me at clasheswithkhakis.com. Reach out through email. This is shburke@clasheswithkhakis.com. And yeah, see me at a lot of the trade shows for outdoor hunt, fish, and bike, where I try to get out there as much as possible.
Amazing. Well, Sarah, thank you again for taking the time.
Thank you, Cole.
I've got a lot of notes and I want to reflect on this conversation as well and hopefully take some of these practices and implement them for our own team. So I'm sure we'll be in touch. Keep us posted if there's a step 7 that eventually materializes.
Thank you, Cole. This has been a pleasure.
All right. Have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye.